Good morning, my friends. I'm Pastor Ben Hayes from First Baptist Church, Dadeville, Alabama, bringing you our thought for the day from my office at First Baptist Church, Dadeville. Back in the saddle, ready to go. Looking forward to all the things God has in store for us today. Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Bible studies. Men, be here. We're in the book of James. This evening, 4:45, our family night supper. Going to be a good supper, followed by prayer meeting, Bible study, children, youth activities, handbell choir, and choir practice. So big day today. So come and join us for that. But right now, join me in Galatians chapter 2. And we're going to pick up in verse 3. Remember, Paul's talking about how he went back to Jerusalem with Barnabas and took Titus with him, a Gentile, and to tell him all the things that was going on there. And I love what he says here in verse 3. He says, "Yet not even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised. And this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty, which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage, to whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you." What in the world is Paul talking about here? Well, it's the same old story. It's happened from the beginning of time. It continues on today, where God has a plan. It's a perfect plan. That plan is to prosper us and not to harm us. That plan is to draw us closer to Himself and bless us. And no matter whether we're talking about the nation of Israel or we're talking about the modern day church or the early church, there have always been those who have crept in trying to say, look, you know what? God's plan isn't good enough. You got to follow our plan. And for Paul, what they were doing is there was this group of people who were supposedly Christians who came from a Jewish culture who kept following him around, stirring up trouble, they went back to Jerusalem to the early church leaders and said, hey, Paul and Barnabas are doing the wrong things because they're teaching people that all they have to do is trust in the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ, and they can become Christians. And we all know that in order to become a Christian, you first got to become a Jewish person first by circumcision. And that was their thing. Follow the rituals, follow the rules, follow the regulations. And how many times do we do that today? Now, look, I'm going to tell you something. It is important that we follow the rules. It is important that we don't do some things and that we do other things. It is important that we worship and follow the rituals of worship. All of those things are important for the believer, but they're not important for salvation. Salvation is by the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ. And anytime somebody says there's something you've got to do to be saved other than trust in Jesus, then they're teaching a false gospel. That's what these guys were doing. So Paul says, we went back to Jerusalem and met with that Jerusalem council, Acts chapter 15, and said, guess what? Not even Titus, this Gentile that we took with us, was compelled to be circumcised. Why? Because Paul and Barnabas told what God was doing, because Peter stood up and told what God was doing, and because James, the leader of the church, said, hey, why in the world will we try to add the burden that we can't bear as Jewish men and that our ancestors were never able to bear? Why would we add that burden to these new believers, a burden that they could never bear? If we really believe that salvation is by the grace of God through faith in Jesus Christ, why do we want to require that these men be circumcised? And look at what Paul says. He says, this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in. False brethren. Man, he's naming the group. These are people who are like Jesus talked about, who will come up to him and say, but Lord, look at all the things we did for you. And Jesus is going to say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. They are professors of faith, but not possessors of faith. They know the right way, but they don't follow the right way. And Paul says these false brethren secretly brought in, they were brought in to cause these trouble because they had followed him around, spying out what they were doing, attacking the liberty that we have in Christ Jesus. Now, I want you to understand something here. Liberty in our faith, liberty in our relationship with God is not the same thing as license to sin. And that's always been the problem. We can't get the idea of liberty in our relationship with God separated from license to sin. And that's what's going on in our world today. And I'm going to stop here and we'll pick up here tomorrow. But I want you to think about those two thoughts. What is the difference between liberty in our relationship with Christ and a license to sin? And that's where we'll pick up tomorrow. Be blessed. I'll see you back here then.